A man can lose his land, his fortune, even his family's respect. But once he loses his dignity, he's already dead. I whispered those words to myself the morning Sarah came back to farm. 62 winters had carved lines in my face deeper than the plow furrows that ran through the fields. This house, this land, every beam and stone, Alice and I built it together. After she passed, the silence became unbearable at times, yet also sacred. Her presence lingered in the smell of old cedar, in the faded curtains she sewed, in the porch swing she loved. That swing creaked behind me as a November wind carried dry leaves across the yard, each one a reminder that everything living eventually falls. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I hadn't seen Sarah in weeks. She had called once, her voice clipped, cold. Now she appeared at the gate with David, her husband, and the look in her eyes told me this wasn't a friendly visit. Their car door slammed, echoing across the yard. David adjusted his cheap suit jacket, as if we were about to negotiate a merger, not share coffee. Sarah didn't even hug me. "Dad," she said, straight to point, "we need to talk about selling the farm." My chest tightened. David stood behind her, arms crossed, smirking like a man who thought he already owned the deed. I invited them in, set coffee on the table, though I knew it would taste bitter no matter how much sugar they stirred. Sarah spoke fast: debts, investors, children's needs, opportunities slipping away. David nodded like a lawyer prompting his witness. "You got all this land sitting idle," Sarah pressed. "Think about your grandkids. We could finally breathe if you just let it go. Don't you care about us?" The words hit harder than I expected. Alice would have cried hearing our daughter weaponize the idea of family like that. I stared at the table, tracing the grain of the wood we'd sanded together decades ago. "I do care," I said slowly. "That's why I won't sell. This farm isn't just acres of dirt. It's a promise I made to your mother. It's your home, Sarah, your children's home. Once it's gone forever." She scoffed, loud enough to rattle the walls. "Home? It's a museum of your grief. Mom's dead, Dad. You're clinging to ghosts while we drown." I saw David's grin widen at that. He enjoyed every cut of her words. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from rage I fought to keep beneath the surface. I leaned forward. "Don't you ever talk about your mother like that again. You want my help? You'll get respect first." For a second, her eyes faltered. Then she straightened, chin high, the same stubborn angle she had when she was 15, and thought rules didn't apply to her. Only this time, her defiance carried something darker: greed. She pushed back her chair. "If you won't help willingly, maybe we'll find another way." The air turned heavy. I watched her storm out with David at her heels, his shoes squeaking against the floor Alice polished every Sunday. Their car roared down the drive, spitting gravel like sparks. The kitchen fell silent again, except for the faint rattle of the old clock. I felt Alice's absence more sharply than ever, as if she were watching from that swing outside, disappointed not in Sarah, but in me for letting this fracture deepen. I told myself it was just anger, just words. But deep down I knew this was only the beginning, because the look Sarah gave me before slamming the door wasn't of a daughter pleading for help. It was of someone planning my funeral. 3 days passed before I picked up the phone. Pride can be a fortress, but it can also be a prison, and I wasn't ready to let Sarah's words become the last stones laid between us. The house felt too quiet without Alice's gentle laugh to soften my doubts. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the oak table, and stared at the number written in my old address book. My finger hovered before I finally pressed the call button. "Dad." Sarah's voice was sharp, guarded. I cleared my throat. "Listen, Sarah, I can't sell the farm. That's final, but I want to help. I can spare $15,000 from my savings. Enough for a fresh start. Maybe give you some breathing room until David figures things out." Silence on the line, heavy, charged. Then came the explosion. "15,000? She snapped. "Do you think that's funny? Our debts are 6 figures. Investors are breathing down our necks. Do you want to show up at the kids' school and tell them Grandpa offered pocket change while their future crumbles? My jaw clenched. It's not pocket change. It's what I can give without tearing apart the life your mother and I built. Her laugh was cruel, hollow. The life you built? You mean this mausoleum you sit in all day? Mom wouldn't want you rotting in that house. She'd want you to help your family. I felt my breath itch. She had invoked Alice's name like a weapon, twisting it against me. I closed my eyes, picturing Alice's gentle hands brushing dirt from a seedling, her quiet strength in every storm. Don't speak for your mother, I said, voice low but steady. But Sarah wasn't finished. Her words poured like acid. You care more about wood and dirt than your grandchildren. Do you know how humiliating this is, begging my own father for real help and getting insulted with crumbs? You don't care, Dad. You never did. That last sentence cut deeper than any blade. I had raised her, held her when she scraped her knees, worked overtime to pay for her college. I had sacrificed so much, and now she stood on the other side of the line, rewriting history with venom. I'm sorry you see it that way. I whispered. This is the best I can do. The rest, Sarah, is your responsibility. There was a sharp intake of breath. Then, click, the line went dead. I sat in silence, the phone still warm in my hand. Outside, the late autumn wind howled across the fields, rattling the windows. It sounded almost like a warning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the halls, the photograph of Alice and Sarah staring back at me like silent jurors. I realized then that my daughter wasn't just desperate. She was angry, dangerous, a cornered animal, ready to bite. And so, before dawn, I dressed, drove into town, and knocked on the door of an old friend, William Harris, attorney. He had helped me draft the original, years ago. His eyes widened when I explained what I needed now. You're serious, Edward? He asked. As serious as death, I said. The farm goes into a trust. For the grandchildren, not Sarah, not David. They won't touch a penny until they're 25. It's the only way to protect what Alice and I built. William leaned back, nodding slowly. I'll draw it up. But Edward, if you're right about your daughter, you need to watch your back. Driving home, the sunrise cast a bloody red across the horizon, staining the fields. For the first time in years, I felt not just the weight of loss, but the shadow of betrayal growing taller by the hour. And I knew, without a doubt, that Sarah wasn't finished with me. The phone rang a week later, just as I was chopping wood out by the barn. My hand stiffened on the handle of the axe when I saw Sarah's name glowing on the screen. I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but something in me, the part that still remembered braiding her hair when she was a little girl, made me swipe and answer. Her voice was soft this time. Too soft. Dad? It's me. I'm sorry. I said nothing at first, waiting. She filled the silence like she always had. I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. David's been under so much pressure, and I lost it. You've always been there for me, and her voice cracked, rehearsed or not. It carried the right tremor of vulnerability. We'd love to have you for Thanksgiving. The kids miss you. It wouldn't be the same without you. Thanksgiving, Alice's favorite holiday. She used to roast a turkey before dawn, humming hymns while basting it. She'd set the table with her mother's china, polish the silver until it gleamed. The smell of her pumpkin pie would linger in the walls for days. My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to slam the door on the invitation, to tell Sarah I saw through her sudden sweetness. But another part, the widower's part, ached for a table surrounded by family, even if fractured. I'll think about it, I said finally. Please, Dad, she whispered. It would mean so much. The kids are excited already. I hung up, staring at the horizon as the axe blade glinted in the low sun. The invitation dangled in the air like bait on a hook. That night, I went into the attic. The place smelled of dust and cedar, of Alice's perfume that still lingered in her old scarves. I opened a trunk and pulled out her recipe book, its pages stained with butter and flour fingerprints. My fingers traced the page titled Pumpkin Pie, Alice's Way. If I was going to walk into whatever Sarah and David were planning, I would carry a piece of Alice with me. Her pie had always been the heart of Thanksgiving. In the following days, I prepared. I shopped for spices, baked a practice pie that filled a farmhouse with memories. I even picked up small gifts for the grandchildren, a model train set for Michael, storybooks for little Anna. But I couldn't silence the unease gnawing at me. Every detail felt staged. Sarah's apology too sudden, her invitation too perfect, the timing too neat after I had refused her demands. I remembered what William Harris had said, his eyes narrowing in warning. Watch your back. On Thanksgiving morning, I dressed in my best coat, the one Alice had given me on our 25th anniversary. I loaded the pie and gifts into the truck and drove toward Sarah's house. The roads were lined with bare trees, their branches stretching like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. When I arrived, the house looked picture perfect. Warm lights in the windows, wreath on the door, children's laughter spilling into the cold air. Sarah opened the door with a smile, so white it could have been carved from porcelain. "Dad, you came," she exclaimed, wrapping me in a hug that felt stiff, rehearsed. David stood behind her, his grin plastered on like cheap paint. Inside, the table was set with polished silver, the turkey glistening, candles flickering. It looked like something from a magazine. Too flawless, too controlled. As I set Alice's pie on the counter, I caught Sarah watching me from across the room. Her eyes lingered a second too long, calculating, like a chess player plotting her next move. I smiled back, but inside, the truth rang clear as a church bell. This wasn't a family gathering. It was an ambush. The warmth of Sarah's house was almost suffocating after the chill of the drive. Candles flickered on every surface, their glow dancing across walls that felt too pristine, too carefully arranged. David poured wine with the swagger of a man who believed the night already belonged to him. The grandchildren were the only genuine light in that room. Michael ran to me, tugging my sleeve to show the little train set I brought. His eyes shone like mine used to when Alice surprised me with a new tool for farm. Anna climbed into my lap with her storybook, begging me to read later. Their innocence was the only thing untainted. "Dinner's ready," Sarah announced, her voice sweet as syrup. She carved the turkey with exaggerated grace. David raised his glass to toast family unity. I forced a polite smile, but every bite of food tasted like sawdust. The laughter, the small talk, it was all theater, an elaborate play staged to disguise something festering beneath. Sarah leaned across the table. "Dad, this means the world to me. Having you here, like old times." Her words were honey, but her eyes were steel. I nodded, hiding the storm in my chest. Your mother always said Thanksgiving was about gratitude. She would have liked this. For a flicker of a second, Sarah's smile faltered. I caught it, a crack in the porcelain mask. She quickly recovered, raising her glass again. To Mom, then. The children clinked their cups of cider against ours, unaware of the currents swirling around them. As dessert approached, Sarah insisted on brewing tea. She brought out Alice's old china cups, an odd choice, since I hadn't seen them outside my house in years. Had she taken them after Alice passed, or stolen them without asking? Either way, seeing them here felt like a violation. While David distracted the kids with joke, Sarah fussed over the teapot, her hands shaking ever so slightly. Steam curled upward, carrying the scent of chamomile. Then I saw it. The flick of her wrist, the small packet slipping from her sleeve, the white powder falling into my cup like snow into a grave. She thought I hadn't noticed. She thought her little sleight of hand could escape the eyes of a man who had survived storms, funerals, and betrayals deeper than any debt. My throat tightened, but I kept my face calm. I laughed at David's story, nodded along, even reached for the sugar bowl as if nothing was wrong. Sarah placed the cup in front of me, her smile triumphant, almost giddy. For a moment, the room blurred. My daughter, my flesh and blood. She had chosen poison over patience, inheritance over love. I looked down at the cup, the delicate porcelain rim catching the candlelight. Alice's cups. The irony struck me hard. Sarah would use her mother's memory to try and kill her father. I wrapped my fingers around the handle, steady as stone. My decision was already made. I would not be the one drinking tonight. I held the teacup in my hand, its porcelain almost too fragile for the weight it carried. Sarah's gaze burned into me, searching for any twitch, any hesitation. I gave her nothing. I lifted the cup halfway to my lips, then paused, as though remembering something. Sugar, I said lightly, setting the cup back down. Alice always took her sweet. Sarah nodded quickly, perhaps too quickly. Of course, Dad. Let me get it for you. She rose from the table, her dress brushing the chair legs. The moment her back turned, I moved. My hand slid across the table, smooth as years of farming taught me. Quiet, deliberate. I switched my cup with hers, the motion concealed by a plate I shifted and the laughter of the children chasing each other around the living room. My heart pounded like a drum, but my face remained still, as though I were only rearranging silverware. By the time Sarah returned, sugar bowl in hand, the cup set innocently in place. She smiled, certain of her secret victory. "Here you go, Dad," she said, spooning sugar into what she believed was my tea. I stirred slowly, the spoon clinking against porcelain. Across the table, David raised his glass again, oblivious, drunk on his own self-importance. "To family," he declared. Sarah lifted her cup, eyes never leaving mine. I raised mine as well, a mirror to her gesture. The candlelight shimmered between us, a duel fought not with swords, but with silence and porcelain. We drank. I only sipped, letting the warm liquid pass over my tongue, while Sarah tipped hers back eagerly, triumphant in her imagined victory. The room carried on in laughter and chatter, but my focus stayed locked on her face. At first, nothing. She even smiled smug, like a cat watching a trapped mouse. But then her expression shifted, a flicker of confusion. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the cup down. "Is something wrong, Sarah?" I asked, my tone calm, measured. Her lips parted, then closed. She forced a laugh. "Too hot," she muttered, dabbing her lips with a napkin. But I saw the sweat bead along her temple. I saw her swallow hard, her eyes darting from me to the cup as realization crawled its way into her mind. The room dimmed around us. The children's laughter grew distant, muffled. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and Sarah's shallow breaths. David was still talking, boasting about some new deal he swore would turn their luck around. He hadn't noticed yet. Not yet. But Sarah knew, and I knew she knew. I leaned forward, my voice just above a whisper meant for her alone. "You should have remembered, Sarah. Your mother's tea was always sweet." Her eyes widened, her face pale as ash. That was the moment the first crack of terror appeared, not in my heart, but in hers. At first, Sarah tried to mask it. She forced a smile, forced conversation, anything to keep control of the room. But her hands betrayed her. They twitched against a napkin, gripping and releasing as though she could wring the poison out of her veins. David kept droning on about investors, gesturing with his glass, oblivious to the storm brewing beside him. "It's all about timing," he said proudly. "One big deal and everything changes." I watched Sarah, not him. Her skin was losing color, her lips pressing tight to stifle a groan. She shifted in her chair, the fork clattering to her plate. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" I asked, voice smooth, steady, almost tender. Her eyes snapped to mine, wide with horror. She couldn't answer. She knew if she opened her mouth, the truth would spill out. Not just a bile rising in her throat, but the plot she'd woven. David finally noticed. "Sarah, you okay?" He chuckled nervously. "Too much wine." "No," she whispered, but it came out broken, ragged. She clutched her stomach, her chair scraping the floor as she staggered back. The children froze. Michael's toy train tumbled from his hands, clattering across the hardwood. Anna whimpered, hiding behind the table leg. All eyes turned to Sarah. For once, the spotlight she craved illuminated not triumph, but exposure. She tried to steady herself, gripping the edge of the table. Her cup tipped, spilling the last drops of poison tea onto the white tablecloth. The stain spread like ink, damning and undeniable. David frowned, confused. What the hell is going on? I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "Ask your wife," I said quietly. Sarah's face twisted, a grotesque mass of pain and fury. You switched them," she hissed, her voice hoarse, broken by panic. David's eyes darted between us. "Switch what? Sarah, what's he talking about?" She lunged toward me, then faltered, falling to her knees. The children cried out as she collapsed against the rug, gasping. The room erupted in chaos. David knelt beside her, shaking her shoulders. "Sarah, answer me. What's happening?" I stood slowly, my shadow stretching across the table. My voice carried above the cries. "She tried to kill me, David, with that tea." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. David looked at the cup, the spilled stain, then at Sarah writhing on the floor. His face drained of color. "You're lying," he whispered, but it lacked conviction. "I wish I were," I said. My gaze fell on Sarah, clutching her stomach, tears streaking her face. For the first time that night, she wasn't a puppeteer. She was a spectacle, and everyone was watching. The grandchildren wide-eyed and terrified. David, speechless, his world unraveling. And me, standing above it all, not as the victim, but as the man who had seen this treachery coming and refused to bow. Sarah's body shook as she whispered through clenched teeth, "You'll regret this?" But her threat dissolved into a choked sob, and I knew, in that instant, the poison wasn't just in her veins. It had been in her soul for years. David's face twisted between rage and disbelief, like a man trying to solve a puzzle where every piece cuts his fingers. He shook Sarah's shoulders harder, his voice rising. "Tell me he's lying. Sarah, tell me this isn't true." She tried to speak, but the words dissolved into coughs, her body betraying her even as her pride clung to silence. The children cried, their small voices piercing the air like glass shattering. I stepped forward, my boots heavy on the floorboards. "She poisoned me, David, and if I hadn't seen her slip that powder into my cup, I'd be the one choking on this floor instead of her." David's head snapped toward me, his mouth opening, closing, searching for some argument, some way to defend his wife. But his eyes told the truth. He believed me. Still, pride makes fools of men. "You don't know what you saw," he barked, his voice breaking. "Maybe it was medicine, maybe—" "Medicine?" I cut him off, cold. "Then why did she switch cups when she thought no one was looking? Why serve it only to me?" His mouth clamped shut. The children clung to each other, staring at their mother with wide, wet eyes. The silence dragged heavy across the room. Sarah finally lifted her head, her face pale and slick with sweat. "You ruined everything," she croaked, glaring at me with venom. "You could have just sold the farm. You could have fixed it all. But you had to make this hard." Her voice cracked on that last word. Hard, as though murdering her own father was simply the next practical solution. David recoiled as though slapped. You really did it." Sarah turned to him desperately, grabbing his sleeve. "I did it for us. For the kids. Don't you see? He's selfish. He's always been selfish. He would have let us starve while he sat on acres of useless dirt." Her plea echoed off the walls, but instead of sympathy, it drew only horror. The mask had slipped, and beneath it was something raw, ugly, undeniable. I felt my chest rise, my voice steadier than it had been in years. "No, Sarah, I wasn't sitting on dirt. I was protecting what your mother and I built. For you, for your children. And now you've shown them exactly what greed does to a soul." The words hung there, heavier than the scent of chamomile still rising from the poisoned cup. David stared at Sarah, his jaw slack. In that moment, she was no longer his partner in ambition. She was the architect of his humiliation. And she had done it in front of the one man who knew her better than anyone, her father. The children whimpered, their innocence pierced by betrayal. They couldn't yet understand. Anna's little voice broke the silence. "Mommy, why are you sick?" Sarah's face crumpled, the weight of her daughter's gaze striking harder than any rebuke I could deliver. I stood over them all, a quiet sentinel. The truth was out now, clawing its way into the open. And still, beneath the collapse, I knew I had only revealed the beginning of what I carried. because there was another truth, darker still, waiting in my chest. And when I spoke it, no one in that house would ever see Sarah the same again. The room held its breath. David crouched beside Sarah, but he wasn't holding her anymore. He was holding distance, suspicion, fear. The children clung to each other, their small faces pale. And me? I stood like a judge, sentence heavy on my tongue. "Sarah," I said, my voice low, cutting through the silence, "you've been lying for a long time. Tonight isn't the first betrayal." Her head jerked up, eyes wide with terror that had nothing to do with the poison coursing through her veins. David frowned, shaking his head. "What's he talking about?" I leaned against the table, resting a hand on Alice's pie as though drawing strength from her memory. "I know about the affair with the so-called investor who sank your business, the man who promised you shortcuts and left David holding the bag. You didn't just betray your husband, Sarah. You betrayed your family, your children." The color drained from David's face, as though someone had pulled the plug on his blood. "An affair?" His voice cracked on the word. Sarah's lips trembled, but no denial came. Only silence. Silence that screamed louder than a confession. I pressed on, relentless. "You thought I didn't know, but a friend of David's told me the truth months ago. I stayed quiet because I wanted to protect the children. I wanted to give you a chance to come clean. Instead, you doubled down. Lies upon lies. And now poison." The silence snapped like glass. David stood abruptly, shoving his chair back, so hard it toppled. He stared at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. "Tell me he's lying. Tell me, damn it." Sarah shook her head, tears streaming, but her words caught in her throat. David's face contorted, anger, humiliation, despair, all colliding. "My God," he whispered, "all this time, I thought we were failing because of me, because of my mistakes." He let out a bitter laugh that curdled into a growl. "But it was you. You were the failure. You and your secrets." The children whimpered, confused, frightened. I stepped closer, my voice firm but steady. "Enough. They don't need to hear more tonight. Take them upstairs." David didn't move at first, torn between rage and paralysis. Then, with shaking hands, he gathered the children, whispering empty reassurances as he led them up the stairs. Their small footsteps echoed, fading into the distance. Now it was just Sarah and me. She lay half-curled on the rug, the poison weakening her body, but her eyes still blazed with something feral. "You think this makes you righteous?" she spat. "You think exposing me give you power?" I crouched beside her, close enough that she could see the calm in my eyes. "No, Sarah. What gives me power is that I still love you. But love without respect is just weakness, and I will not be weak anymore." Her lips quivered, her breath ragged. For the first time, she looked not like the calculating woman who plotted my death, but like the little girl who once clung to my leg, afraid of the dark. The sight almost broke me. Almost. But then I remembered the powder slipping from her sleeve, the smug grin as she set the cup before me. And I knew this was only the second act of a reckoning. The real judgment had yet to come. Sarah's breathing grew shallow, her body trembling as though every muscle fought against itself. The poison wasn't going to kill her. I knew that much. It would burn, it would humiliate, it would strip away her illusions of control, but it wouldn't end her life. I'd made sure of that when I recognized what she was pouring. I stayed kneeling beside her, watching the sweat bead along her temples. For once, Sarah had no script, no performance polish in the mirror, just raw panic and the shattering of her pride. The front door banged open. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, stepped inside. Mr. Carter from next door, his wife behind him. They froze at the sight. Sarah writhing on the rug, David pale and shaking in the hallway, and me, standing calm in the storm. "What happened?" Mrs. Carter cried, rushing forward. "Call an ambulance," I said firmly. "She's been poisoned." Gasps filled the air. David, his voice hoarse, managed, She drank it herself." He couldn't bring himself to say the rest. The Carters didn't press. They hurried to the phone, dialing emergency services. I could already hear the sirens in the distance, faint but approaching, slicing the night like a blade. Sarah clutched my wrist with surprising strength, her nails digging into my skin. Don't you dare tell them. I leaned down, my lips near her ear. I don't have to. You've already told them yourself. Every twitch of your hand, every word you couldn't say to David. Truth has a way of bleeding out. Her grip faltered. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and despair. You think you've won. I stood, my voice carrying over the room. This isn't about winning, Sarah. This is about what's left when lies are stripped away. The paramedics burst in, kneeling at her side, checking vitals, asking questions. David stepped back, numb, his hands twitching as if trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. I followed as they lifted Sarah onto the stretcher, her head rolling weakly to the side. The Carters whispered each other, their eyes darting from me to David, piecing together fragments they would share with the whole neighborhood by morning. As the stretcher wheeled past me, Sarah's gaze locked with mine. In that flicker, I saw not just a daughter undone, but a warning. She would not forget this humiliation. At the hospital, after hours of waiting, the doctor finally emerged. She'll live, he said. It was a strong dose, but not lethal. She'll need rest, and she'll need honesty if she expects to heal. I nodded, though the last word wasn't meant for her body. When the others had gone home, when David sat slumped in a chair down the hall, I entered Sarah's room. She lay pale against the sheets, tubes in her arms, the beeping of machines filling the silence. Her eyes opened as I drew the chair close. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but sharp. You thought this was about money, about the farm, but I already changed the will. The land isn't yours. It isn't David's. It belongs to the children, locked in trust until they're grown. You can't touch it. Not a penny. All your scheming, all your betrayal, it bought you nothing. Her lips parted, but no words came. Only tears. I placed Alice's recipe book on the table beside her bed, the leather worn from years of use. This is what survives. Not greed, not betrayal. Legacy, love. And if you ever want to see it again, you'll have to earn it. Her tears slid silently into the pillow. For the first time in years, I left her without a promise, only a boundary. And as I walked out of that room, I knew the war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted. Hospitals have a way of shrinking people. Even the proudest man looks small beneath fluorescent lights and antiseptic air. David sat hunched in a plastic chair outside Sarah's room, his head in his hands. For all his bluster, the arrogance that once puffed up his chest was gone. What remained was a man hollowed out by shame. He looked up when I approached. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice cracked. You knew about all of it, didn't you? I stopped a few feet away, giving him the dignity of space. I knew enough. His laugh was bitter, empty, and you said nothing. Let me keep believing she was loyal, that I just wasn't enough of a man. You weren't supposed to bear that shame, I told him. I kept silent because the children didn't need to grow up in the wreckage of your marriage. I thought she might turn around, but she chose to double down on deceit. He pressed his palms into his eyes, groaning. God, I've been such a fool. Defending her, standing behind her every demand. I thought we were partners. I sat beside him. For the first time since all this began, I felt something close to pity. Sometimes love blinds us, David, but blindness can be cured if you're willing to open your eyes. He didn't answer. The silence stretched, heavy but cleansing. By the next morning, Sarah was stable enough to be left in care. I drove home alone, the long country road stretching before me like an unwritten verdict. The farmhouse greeted me with its familiar creaks, the smell of wood smoke and old leather. I walked room to room, touching Alice's things, feeling her presence guiding me still. Later that week, I returned, not for Sarah, but for the grandchildren. When I knocked on the door, Michael flung it open, eyes lighting up. "Grandpa!" he shouted, throwing his arms around me. Anna followed, clutching her book. David stood behind them, tired but quieter now, his face lined with the scars of recent truths. He didn't speak against my visit. He only nodded, as if admitting he no longer had the right to block the bond between me and the children. Inside, I set the model train on the floor with Michael, his laughter cutting through the heaviness that had lingered. I read Anna her story, her small hand clutching my sleeve as her eyes grew wide at the pictures. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. Not perfect, not whole, but real. When I rose to leave, Michael asked, "Grandpa, are you coming back soon?" I smiled, kneeling to meet his gaze. "As often as I can. This farm, this family, it's yours more than anyone else's. One day you'll understand why." David heard that, and though his face darkened, he said nothing. On the way out, I glanced back at Sarah's empty chair by the window, the place she used to sit with her children. Empty now, and in that emptiness lay the truth she had carved for herself. Greed had stolen her seat before the fire, leaving her only shadows. As I drove away, the farmhouse lights glowing behind me, I understood something clearly. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about teaching Sarah and David, if he had any sense left, that the inheritance of love, respect, and memory outweighed any inheritance of money. But I also knew pride like hers doesn't surrender so easily. And the next time she rose to fight, she would come with teeth bared. 2 weeks passed before I saw Sarah again. Winter had begun to settle over the fields, thin frost tracing the fences like white scars. I spent those days repairing the barn roof, stacking firewood, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind replayed every second of Thanksgiving night. The hospital called first. Sarah had been discharged. David, they said, had taken her home, though not without tension obvious to anyone watching. It was only a matter of time before she came to see me. And sure enough, one gray afternoon, her car crunched up the gravel drive. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, as she stepped out. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, her face drawn tight. Gone was a polished smile, replaced with something brittle. "Dad," she said, voice low, almost pleading. "Can we talk?" I didn't invite her in. I let her stand in the cold a moment longer, the wind tugging at her hair. Then I stepped aside. Inside, but only for words, Sarah. Nothing else. She nodded quickly, slipping past me into the familiar warmth of the farmhouse. Her eyes flicked around the room, lingering on Alice's photographs, on the pie tin still sitting on the counter. She swallowed hard. "I know you hate me," she began, hands trembling as she wrung them together. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I wasn't thinking straight. Everything was falling apart. Dad, David's business, the bills piling up. I panicked. I thought if I could just end it quickly, the inheritance would fix everything. I'm sorry." Her voice cracked on the last word, though I couldn't tell if it was sorrow or desperation. I leaned against the table, watching her carefully. "You didn't just panic, Sarah. You planned. You rehearsed. You used your mother's cups, her memory, as part of your scheme. That wasn't panic. That was choice." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't soften. Not yet. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Please, the kids need you. I need you. I'll do better. I swear it. Just don't cut me out completely." I let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then I spoke, my voice steady. "You already cut yourself out, Sarah. The night you poured that powder into my tea, you severed something deeper than money or property. You severed trust." Her breath hitched, her shoulders shaking. "So what now? You never speak to me again." "No," I said. "I'll speak. I'll see you at birthdays, holidays, when the children want me. But understand this. My love is for them now. My loyalty is to their future, not to your ambition." The word struck her like a slap. She crumpled into a chair, her sobs raw, unpolished. For a fleeting second, I almost reached out, almost placed a hand on her shoulder like I used to when she was a child. But I stopped. She had to feel the weight of this. At last, she lifted her head, eyes red, voice hoarse. "You'll regret pushing me away." I met her gaze, unflinching. "No, Sarah. The only regret I have is that I didn't set these boundaries sooner." Her jaw clenched. The sorrow in her eyes hardened into something sharper, a glint of resentment buried under the tears. She stood, straightening her coat. "This isn't over," she whispered. Then she walked out, the door slamming against the winter air. I stood in the silence of the farmhouse, Alice's picture staring back at me from the mantel. For the first time, I spoke aloud to her memory. "I've done what you would have wanted. Protected the children. Protected the land. Now let her choose her path." The wind rattled the windows, and I swore I heard Alice's voice in the gust. "Hold the line, Edward." And I would, even if it meant standing alone. I thought perhaps Sarah's anger would fade with time. That distance might cool the fire in her. But greed doesn't die quietly. It festers, waiting for another stage. The next came at church. It was the first Sunday of Advent. The pews filled with familiar faces, neighbors I'd known all my life. I sat near the front, Alice's old hymnal clutched in my hands, the same one she had marked with notes in the margins. Singing those carols had always been her joy, and I kept the tradition alive in her absence. The sermon had just ended when I saw Sarah and David slip in late. Whispers rippled through the congregation, the whole town already buzzing from the Thanksgiving debacle. Folks had seen the ambulance, heard the rumors. Some swore Sarah had taken ill. Others suspected more. Truth, like smoke, had already spread beyond control. When the service ended, I made my way toward the exit. That's when Sarah struck. She stepped into the aisle, her voice sharp enough to turn every head. "Dad, wait." I stopped, the entire congregation watching. Her face was pale but painted with determination. She wanted a stage, and she had chosen the sanctuary itself. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "Why are you turning everyone against me? I've suffered enough." A hush fell. I felt dozens of eyes on us, neighbors waiting to see if the old farmer or his daughter would yield. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "Sarah, I haven't turned anyone against you. You've done that yourself. You poured poison into my tea in your own home on Thanksgiving Day. You chose greed over blood, lies over truth. That's what people know. That's what they see." Gasps spread like wildfire. Sarah's mouth trembled. "You're humiliating me." I met her gaze, firm and unflinching. "No, you humiliated yourself the moment you put a price tag on your mother's memory." The crowd murmured. Some shook their heads. Others whispered behind hands. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the pews. Sarah's composure cracked, tears welling as she choked on words that refused to form. She glanced around, desperate for an ally, but found only silence, eyes averted, the cold judgment of community. I lifted Alice's hymnal, holding it where all could see. "This book belonged to your mother. She taught you these songs, these words about grace and gratitude, and yet you've turned them into bargaining chips for your own ambition. If you want redemption, Sarah, it won't be bought with inheritance. It will be earned with honesty." The sanctuary was still. Even the children hushed, sensing the gravity of the moment. Sarah's shoulders shook as she pushed past me, fleeing down the aisle and out into the cold. David followed, his head bowed low. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mrs. Carter, sitting in the front row, stood and touched my arm gently. "You did right, Edward," she whispered. The truth needed to be said. I nodded, though the weight of it pressed heavy on me. Public humiliation was never my goal, but sometimes the truth demands a stage. As I walked out into the winter air, the hymnal pressed to my chest. I knew the battle wasn't finished. Sarah's pride was wounded, but pride rarely dies easily. And in the wound, resentment often grows. After that Sunday, Sarah kept her distance. Weeks passed in silence, the farm blanketed under snow, the fields sleeping beneath winter's hand. I thought perhaps she had finally broken, humbled enough to retreat, to reflect. But pride rarely dies so quietly. It was late January when the phone rang again. Her voice was measured, careful, as though rehearsed. "Dad, I want to make amends. For the kids' sake. Can we talk?" Her tone was soft, but I'd learned to hear the steel beneath it. Still I agreed, not because I trusted her, but because the children deserved at least one more attempt at peace. She invited me to a dinner at their house. Not a holiday this time, just a quiet meal. My gut twisted the moment I hung up, the same warning I felt before Thanksgiving. Still, I baked another of Alice's pies, not as a gesture of trust, but as a shield, something pure to carry into a place that stank of schemes. When I arrived, the house glowed with warm lights again, as though nothing had changed. The table was set, food laid out neatly. The children greeted me with genuine joy, their arms around my waist, their voices bubbling. It was only their presence that kept me from turning around and leaving. At the table, Sarah kept her tone light, almost fragile. She spoke about the children's school, about plans for the spring. David sat beside her, silent, his jaw tight, eyes sunken. He looked less like a husband and more like a prisoner. Finally, Sarah set down her fork and leaned toward me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Dad, I've been thinking about the trust, about the land. I know you meant well, but maybe it's too strict. Maybe if I had partial access, just enough to manage things properly, we could rebuild what's been lost." There it was. Not apology, not reconciliation, just another angle of the same hunger. I leaned back, folded my arms. "The trust is not yours, Sarah. It's theirs, Michael's, Anna's, and it will stay untouched until they are old enough to understand what responsibility means. You'll not squander what your mother and I built." Her mask cracked just slightly. "So you're still determined to humiliate me? To paint me as some villain while you play the saint?" I set my fork down. My voice dropped to a calm steel. "I don't need to paint you as anything. You've done that yourself. The night you tried to kill me, the affair you thought I didn't know about, the lies to your husband, to your children. You wrote your own portrait, Sarah." Her face flushed, her lips trembling with fury. For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking clock. Then she raised her voice, loud, shrill, enough to make the children flinch. "You think you've won, old man? You think keeping this farm locked up in papers will make you the hero? You'll die alone in that house. Clean the ghosts and no one will care." Her words rang through the dining room, each one a shard meant to cut. But I didn't flinch. I let the silence hang heavy. Let her own children hear the venom in her voice. Finally, I stood, lifting Alice's pie from the counter. "You're right, Sarah. I will die one day. But when I do, your children will inherit love, not greed. They will know their grandfather stood for something that mattered." The children's eyes followed me as I walked to the door. Behind me, Sarah seethed, her humiliation now public within her own home. David sat motionless, broken, unable, or unwilling to defend her anymore. And as I stepped into the cold night, I knew the final confrontation was close. The daughter I raised was gone. What remained was an enemy, and one last reckoning waited for us both. Snow fell heavier in February, blanketing the fields in silence. The farm had never looked more like a fortress, untouched, unyielding, a monument to everything Alice and I had built. I found myself walking the perimeter often, listening to the crunch of my boots on frozen ground, watching the horizon as though expecting an army. But the war I feared was already brewing closer to home. The rumors reached me first, carried by neighbors who spoke in careful tones. Sarah had begun whispering to people in town, twisting the story of Thanksgiving into something almost believable. She told them I had lost my mind, that grief had warped me into paranoia, that I accused her of poisoning me when she had only tried to help. She painted herself as the dutiful daughter of a bitter old man clinging to property instead of family. It worked on some. Others avoided me now, their smiles stiff, their eyes cautious. It didn't take much to see Sarah's hand guiding the whispers. But she made her biggest mistake at the town council meeting. I rarely attended, but that night, something in my gut told me to go. The hall was packed, the heater groaning, steam rising from boots as farmers stomped the snow off. I sat near the back, quiet, listening. Then Sarah stood. She wore her best coat, her voice polished, rehearsed to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I love this town as much as any of you, but we all know things change. Land must serve the living, not the dead. My father refuses to sell his farm, even though it could bring jobs, investment, growth. He clings to it, letting it rot, while the rest of us struggle. Her words spread like fire through the hall, murmurs rising. I felt the sting, not because of the insult, but because she was using the town, my neighbors, as weapons against me. I stood slowly. The room hushed. Every eye turned. "Sarah," I said, my voice carrying more weight than I expected. "You talk of land as if it were a sack of coins. But this farm is more than soil. It's memory, labor, sacrifice. Your mother and I bled into that earth. And if you think I'll let greed dig it up and sell it to the highest bidder, you don't just insult me. You insult everyone here who ever broke their back for something that mattered." Murmurs shifted. Faces hardened not at me, but at her. I continued, steady as stone. "You speak of jobs, of growth. Yet the only growth you've sown is debt. You squandered what others gave you, lied to your husband, lied to this town. And when the well ran dry, you tried to poison your own father for a quicker inheritance. That's the truth, Sarah. Right here, before God and neighbor." Gasps rippled through the hall. David, slumped in the back, put his head in his hands. Sarah's face burned crimson, her mask torn away in front of the very people she'd hoped to sway. She stammered, tried to speak, but the words drowned beneath the weight of silence, a silence sharper than any blade. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. "This is your third stage, Sarah. Thanksgiving night, the church aisle, and now this hall. Each time, you've revealed yourself. Not because I forced you, but because truth always claws its way out." The council chair cleared his throat, ending the moment, moving on to other business. But the damage was done. As the meeting broke and people shuffled out, their eyes avoided hers, not mine. For once, I wasn't the man on trial. She was, and in her glare, burning across the room as she gathered her coat, I saw it. The fury of a woman stripped bare, humiliated yet again. The final storm was coming, and this time there would be no witnesses to soften the blow. The night of the council meeting left me restless. I sat by the fireplace long after the embers dimmed, listening to the groan of the old farmhouse. Alice's picture watched from the mantel, her eyes calm, as though reminding me this battle wasn't only mine. It was about what we built, what must endure. I knew Sarah wouldn't let it end there. Pride doesn't vanish after 3 humiliations. It sharpens, hardens, seeks revenge of its own. She came to the farm 2 days later. I saw the headlights first, carving through the snow, cutting across the bare trees. I stayed on the porch, arms folded, watching as she climbed out of the car. Her coat was buttoned tight, but her eyes, those eyes, burned with something feral. "Dad," she said flatly, "we need to finish this." I didn't move. Inside, then, but only words. No more games. She stepped past me into the house, her boots leaving wet prints on the floorboards Alice once polished every Sunday. She glanced around at the photographs, the books, the walls layered with decades of living. Her lips curled, half sneer, half sorrow. "You're going to die out here alone," she said. "And for what? Land no one wants. Memories no one remembers. You've already lost me. You'll lose them, too. Michael and Anna will grow up thinking you were just a bitter old man who clung to dirt instead of family." Her words struck, but I stood steady. Better a bitter man who stood for something than a hollow woman who stood for nothing. Her jaw clenched. "You think humiliation is enough? You think making me small in front of neighbors and church makes you righteous? You destroyed my reputation, my marriage, everything. And you think you've won." I stepped closer, my voice low, calm, but unyielding. This was never about winning. It was about truth, about protecting what your mother and I bled for, and about giving your children a chance to inherit something more than lies. She shook her head, tears trembling in her eyes but never falling. "Then give it to me. End this. Sign the farm over and let me rebuild. Or so help me. I'll make sure you're remembered not as a protector, but as a tyrant." I reached behind me and lifted Alice's old recipe book from the counter, its cover worn soft from decades of use. I said it between us. "This is the inheritance, Sarah. Not the land, not the money, the love that went into every page, every stitch, every harvest. And you can't touch it until you remember who you once were." Her face twisted, fury overwhelming the tears. She slammed her fist onto the table, rattling the dishes. I will not be remembered as nothing. I leaned forward, meeting her rage with stillness, then stopped living as nothing. For a moment, only the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Then she grabbed her coat, storming toward the door. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Next time, it won't be words." She left, the slam of the door echoing through the farmhouse. I stood alone in the silence, the recipe book open before me. The page with Alice's pumpkin pie stared back, flour stains and faded ink like whispers from the past. And I knew the final reckoning was coming. Not at a table, not in a hall, but here on this farm, where everything began. I knew she would come at night. Pride is bold in daylight, but desperation lurks best in darkness. The snow had hardened into ice by then, crunching like bones underfoot. I sat in the kitchen, the oil lamp burning low, Alice's recipe book open before me on the table, the page with her pumpkin pie. The same pie I'd carried to Sarah's house on Thanksgiving lay marked with butter stains. Beside it sat the old china teacup, washed clean but forever tainted in my mind. Two objects, two mirrors, one symbol of love, one of betrayal. Near midnight, I heard the crunch of boots outside. The door creaked open without a knock. Sarah stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes wild. "This ends tonight," she said. I didn't rise. "You're right. It does." She slammed the door behind her, her breath visible in the cold air. "You've humiliated me for the last time. You've poisoned my marriage, turned the town against me, stolen what should be mine." I tapped the recipe book with one finger. "I didn't steal it. You gave it away the moment you chose greed over family." Her hand shook as she pulled something from her coat. A letter opener, sharp, gleaming in the lamplight. Not a weapon of war, but enough. "You won't leave me with nothing," she hissed. I rose then, slowly, my voice steady. "Sarah, look around you. This house, these walls, they remember who you used to be. The girl who ran through field with mud on her shoes, who helped her mother roll dough on this very table. That girl had everything. And you killed her long before you tried to kill me." She trembled, the blade wavering in her grip. "You think words can save you?" "No," I said, "but they might save you." I reached into the drawer and pulled out an envelope, thick, sealed with wax. I placed it on the table between us. "The trust, the papers. Proof the land belongs to your children. Untouchable by you, by David, by anyone. This is my last act as your father. To protect them from you." Her face contorted, rage and sorrow colliding. She dropped the letter opener, the metal clattering against the floor. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the chair opposite me. "You've destroyed me," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "I've saved you from yourself. Whether you rise from that is your choice." The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the lamp. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, real this time, not rehearsed. She reached toward the recipe book, her fingers brushing the page, tracing her mother's faded handwriting. "I remember," she whispered, "the smell of cinnamon, the way Mom laughed when I spilled flour." For the first time in years, her voice carried not anger, but memory. I closed the book gently. "That's the inheritance, Sarah. Not the land, not the money. The love you've buried. Dig it back up before it's too late." She looked at me, broken, trembling, her mask shattered completely. When she left that night, she didn't slam the door. She closed it gently, as if afraid to wake the ghosts. I remained at the table, the recipe book before me, the farm silent in the snow. Alice's voice seemed to echo in the rafters. "Hold the line, Edward." And I had held it to the very end. My daughter had lost her war for greed, but perhaps gained a chance for redemption. My grandchildren would inherit not poisoned soil, but protected roots. And I had kept my promise. To Alice, to the land, to myself. The final image lingered as I doused the lamp. The farmhouse standing unbroken in the night, a beacon against the storm. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to sleep, not as a man waiting for betrayal, but as a man who had finally won his peace. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.